How's it going, everyone? It's Javi from Weather Sponge 5000, and in this video we're going to focus on this next potential major hurricane that could develop in the Gulf of Mexico, which right now has a low 30% chance of developing over the next 7 days. However, I think this is kind of misleading, especially when I show you the Global Tropics Hazards Outlook, where the chance of tropical cyclone formation is over 60% by week 2 between September 25th and October 1st, where we clearly see that the conditions are looking more and more conducive enough for tropical cyclone development right over the Caribbean. And we have both of the most reliable computer models taking concerning tracks when it comes to this disturbance, where we have the GFS model wanting to develop a major hurricane, while the European model is also developing some sort of tropical cyclone in the Gulf of Mexico. Not as strong as the GFS model, but it's definitely good to pay close attention to this now that we are getting some consensus that a tropical cyclone will develop somewhere in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico within the next 2 weeks. We also have this tropical disturbance that has a medium chance of developing within the next 7 days. However, it isn't an imminent threat to land, so for this video, I'm primarily going to focus on this disturbance right here. So I'm sure one of your biggest questions is, who is this potential tropical cyclone going to impact? So if we were to continue to move forward with what the GFS model is currently stating, we see that this millibar pressure drops down to 934 millibars, and at this point this is considered nearly a category 5 hurricane, or at the very least hovering around that range. So we easily see a major hurricane in our hands just off the Gulf Coast, which is just south of Louisiana and Texas more specifically. As in a scenario like this, of course, this will be very devastating. This will be very concerning for the Gulf Coast. However, taking a look at the forecast hour, there's still plenty of days to really iron out the forecast, and we're going to need to take a look at several factors that could potentially determine where exactly this tropical cyclone will go. So the first thing you'll notice is that there's going to be an influx of moisture moving in to the Caribbean by the early part of next week, right about Monday, September 23rd, as this is as a result of a gyre that's building right over Central America. And that's simply what we commonly see towards the latter half of the hurricane season, more so around October, where we begin to see gyre season begin in Central America. And oftentimes that does lead to tropical cyclone development somewhere in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, which is the reason why towards the late September and into the October timeframe, this is the area most prominent for tropical cyclone development. And if we were to continue to move forward with the forecast, we see that the GFS model does want to develop this relatively quickly. Now, there are several questions regarding how quickly this could develop, because of course this area of moisture won't be the only area of moisture that's going to exist right over the Gulf of Mexico and Central America at that time, and that could pose issues when it comes to this storm wanting to develop, because if there's too many areas of thunder shower activity, then that'll take a lot of energy away from this center of circulation and really limit it from gradually intensifying or rapidly intensifying in the Caribbean. We're going to definitely need to pay close attention to how compact the moisture will be over Central America to really determine how quickly it'll develop. In this scenario, a GFS model wants to develop it at a very quick pace, which means that we do see a tropical storm rather quickly and could impact the Gulf of Mexico. And another thing that helps this storm when it comes to intensification as well, at least in the GFS model scenario, is that it's a little bit more over water than the European model. The European model is focusing the center circulation more so to move a little bit over land, which is the reason why, if we were to take a quick look at the European model is a lot slower in strengthening this storm system and peaks the strength of this disturbance at a much weaker strength compared to what the GFS model is showing at this point. So if we were to continue to move forward at the same time period, we see the center of circulation is pretty much moving right over the Yucatan Peninsula, and I think that should certainly help limit this storm from potentially rapidly intensifying if this scenario were the correct one, as it really all depends on the ridge that's just to the north of it. If this ridge is a little stronger, this will force some moisture to move a little bit further south westward, and that would mean that it could deal with a little bit too much land interaction from Central America to really have any sort of tropical storm develop due to the land interaction. And if we were to continue to move even more forward with the European model scenario, we see a much weaker scenario where this maybe makes landfall as a tropical storm. It does bring a heavy amount of rainfall, nevertheless, right over Louisiana and Mississippi, but it's definitely a lot less of I'll say impactful scenario of definitely compared to what the GFS model is saying, because we have a tropical storm in the European model scenario, while in the GFS model we have a Category 5 hurricane. So this would certainly be the better case scenario. It would still be concerning when it comes to flooding for Mississippi and Louisiana, and there's still, of course, that possibility that this storm system might not even develop at all, which would certainly be the best case scenario. However, based on what I'm seeing, I think the most likely scenario is that we will see some sort of tropical cyclone develop in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean, and it seems like all indications are pointing towards this at least bringing some impacts to the United States Gulf Coast, as it seems like there's just enough of weakness in ridging that wants to steer this storm system a little bit further northward. Let's take a look at the 500 millibar height anomaly. So there's also, of course, uncertainties with the track. Let me go back to the GFS models track real quick, because as of right now, the GFS model, of course, wants to take a major hurricane towards the western Gulf Coast, impacting more so Louisiana, Texas, and maybe Mississippi on the eastern half of this storm. But if we were to take a look at this same scenario in prior model runs, let's go to 0Z September 18th run, we see that the storm system now the storm moves a lot further eastward in this run, where we see impacts more so right around the Florida Panhandle area and the Big Bend area of Florida, and it's pretty much relatively far from Louisiana and Texas at this time. Now, you're probably wondering what will determine the track of this storm system, whether it moves east towards Florida or west towards Texas and Louisiana. So it really all depends on the amount of ridging that exists right over this area. Of course, if the ridging is stronger, then we should see a track closer to Texas and Louisiana. But if the ridging is weaker, and we see that this upper level low that's expected to move into the northern United States move through by Wednesday, the 25th of 2024, right around the middle part of next week, we see that there's going to be just enough of weakness in ridging to where this upper level low would pick this storm system up and steer it towards the Big Bend area of Florida. As of right now, it's too early to say what will happen for certain. The GFS and the European model are leaning towards the western track right now, but there could easily be variations with the forecast, as I expect it to continue over probably the next maybe 2 days. Then after that, I think we'll get a little bit more of a certain forecast regarding where exactly this could go. So for those right around the eastern Gulf Coast, I wouldn't let your guard down just yet, because we're still relatively far from getting the exact details regarding the track of this storm system, and I think there still could easily be variations and different runs that come out in the near future that would steer the storm a little bit closer to Florida and the eastern portion of the Gulf of Mexico as well, depending on how strong or weak this ridge is. That's something we're going to need to keep in mind. However, taking a look at the model run right now, you're probably wondering what's the big reason why the European model and the GFS model are taking a pretty large variation when it comes to the strength of this storm system once it makes landfall in Louisiana. Well, a big thing is that in the GFS model scenario, we see that, of course, the ridging is stronger, so we see this move westward for one. But also, what's interesting is that the upper level low that's expected to move into the middle section, the mid-southern portion of the country, is a lot weaker in the GFS model scenario, and that means several things. For one thing is that the wind shear would likely be lighter as this approaches Texas and Louisiana, which of course makes it the conditions more favorable for tropical cyclone development. But another thing too is that with a weaker upper level low, that means it's less likely to push a lot of the dry air that's located in the desert southwest towards this storm system. As if we were to take a look at the moisture difference between the GFS and the European model, it's night and day by the time this approaches the Gulf of Mexico, where we see that the amount of dry air is a lot more limited thanks to a weaker upper level low, not really imposing a strong enough of a westerly flow to steer this dry air into the center circulation, while in the European model scenario, the opposite happens, where we see a much stronger upper level low located right over the middle section of the country, and that allows a lot more dry air to filter in because this upper level low is far stronger, the westerly winds are far stronger, and that creates a very asymmetrical storm that makes it very difficult for this to strengthen very much by the time it approaches Texas and Louisiana. So another key thing we're going to pay very close attention to is the strength of this upper level low by the time it approaches the middle of the country, because I think that will be critical in determining whether we see a major hurricane in our hands or potentially not even any sort of tropical cyclone at all making landfall right up along the Gulf Coast. At this point, what I could tell you is that the Gulf Coast will likely experience impacts in some way, shape, or form. Where exactly along the Gulf Coast and how strong it'll be by the time it approaches the Gulf Coast, that still has yet to be seen, but I'll make sure to keep you guys updated over the next few days regarding any sort of major shifts when it comes to the most reliable computer models. So, but throughout the Gulf Coast, definitely keep your eyes peeled over next week, because I think this has the potential of being a very concerning storm if all factors go correct with this storm system. So make sure to stay tuned for more updates regarding this storm system. So here are what the GFS and storm members are stating at this point, and it's the reason why I'm saying to Florida not to let your guard down just yet, just because the computer model shifted their forecast to steer the storm further westward, because we see that pretty much all the storm members are still taking this storm towards the coast of Florida. Now, this is of course subject to change, and some members are a little bit less updated compared to the current model that's out, the main model that's out when it comes to the track of this storm system, but still at least poses a possibility of this storm system moving a little bit further eastward and impacting the eastern Gulf Coast and potentially even further northward into the northeast. We did see a scenario where this storm system didn't stop at Florida. It continued to bring impacts along the southeast coast and even as far as the northeast. So pretty much the east coast, you still want to pay close attention to that possibility of impacts, because I think there's going to be very variable, a lot of changes over the next few days when it comes to a forecast. So to summarize, I think a tropical cyclone is likely to develop somewhere in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. And I do think that whether this storm is a tropical storm, not even a tropical entity, or a hurricane by the time it makes impacts the Gulf Coast, I think that the Gulf Coast will experience at least some sort of impacts when it comes to this disturbance. But exactly where it still has yet to be seen. We're definitely going to need to pay close attention to the upper level low. The stronger it is, the more weaker this storm likely will be. But the weaker it is, the more likely this storm will be stronger by the time it approaches the Gulf Coast. So we're definitely going to need to pay close attention to those factors to determine if we're going to see potentially major impacts in the United States by next week. But that's it for now, guys, and I thank you guys for watching.